What a truly great day for our country. And what a lesson to be reminded of. One of the most obvious lessons of the innumerable lessons of history, that very little of consequence is ever accomplished alone. It's a joint effort. And here we see it with all the people who made this major accomplishment happen. America is a joint effort. And the more we remember that, particularly if we hold public office, the better for all of us. And I take it as a very great and obvious, and for me, heart-lifting privilege to be asked to take part today. I also, in thinking about the accomplishments of the Ladies Association of Mount Vernon, and particularly today with seeing how this has all been made to happen, and particularly this week with our government about to close shop, maybe the thought has occurred to you, we should ask the Women's Association of Mount Vernon to take over. One of my favorite historic sites in our country is Carpenter's Hall, a very small, beautiful, classic work of Georgian architecture, just a few steps down from Independence Hall, which all too few visitors ever even bother to notice, let alone go into. It's where the First Continental Congress met. And what's so striking about it when you go inside is how small it is. From what minor, seemingly, origins we began from. But also very important is that upstairs, in combination with that room where that happened, is a library provided by Benjamin Franklin. Just upstream, 14 miles from where we sit today, on our American Acropolis, stands our Capitol, but also the greatest library in the world, the Library of Congress. Nothing like it on earth. A stupendous accomplishment by a free people. And anytime you get a little down about the state of culture or education or opportunity in our country, please remember that there are more public libraries in America today than there are McDonald's. And so now, today, in this beautiful setting, on this magnificent morning, we're opening a library at Mount Vernon. How thrilling, how important, not just because it's long overdue, but because of the influence, the inspiration, the effect, impact that this gathering place, this center of learning, will have on future generations of all people, all kinds, from all over the world. Benjamin West, the painter, reported that once during the Revolutionary War, he had a private conversation with George III, during which he said to the king that if this war ends and America is the victor, George Washington will retire from public life. And George III said, if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world. And he was. He was. And his shadow, his light, his inspiration extends to our own day. There's no such thing as a self-made man or a self-made woman. It's an expression that should be taken out of the language. We are all the results of parents, teachers, associates, friends, rivals, and we are the result of people we never knew. never met, never can, because they lived hundreds of years before we came on the scene. They've changed our outlook on life. They've provided the very words that we use to speak with. And they provide examples, set an example. It wasn't just that George Washington set an example in his difficult and very dangerous and yet very exciting, promising time. He still sets an example. History is about people. It's not about dates and quotations and provisos and so forth. It's about people. History is human. When, in the course of human events, the operative word there is human. And if you begin to see those who preceded us as human beings, who did not know how everything was going to turn out or how anything was going to turn out, because for them as for us, there was no such thing as the foreseeable future. Never was, never will be. They did not know they were going to win the Revolutionary War. By all logical, realistic observation, there was almost no chance we could win the Revolutionary War. We had no Navy, we had no Army to speak of, all amateurs in effect, and we had no money. And we were up against the most powerful nation on earth, who were our people. And yet, we brought it off. A miracle. Call it the hand of God, call it fate, call it luck. A miracle. As was the man who led that turning point in history. Imagine only a 6th grade education, relatively little experience in war, and his first great moment was a flop, a failure. In Pennsylvania, he started the French and Indian War at Fort Necessity. It was a foolish, almost adolescent thing to have done. He made repeated mistakes during the Revolution, but he always learned from his mistakes. And he had the capacity to get up and keep going. When we choose leaders, we should always take a careful look at how they've handled failure, because failure is part of life. Failure is part of history. And it's those people who don't lapse into self-pity or blaming others, but who get back up and keep the faith and keep going. And he's the prime example of that. And he also understood that leadership involves making the right impression, leading by example. George Washington was very concerned with appearances. He cared immensely about his clothing, whether his civilian clothing or his uniform. Everything had to be clean and of fine cloth and beautifully tailored. He cared in detail about every aspect of Mount Vernon. Every room, all the exterior. He was the architect of that building. And he cared deeply about landscape architecture. This was an infinitely interesting man. Yes, he was commander-in-chief for 8 years. Yes, he was commander-in-chief as president for 8 years. In other words, he was commander-in-chief for 16 years. No other American in our history had anything like that impact. But he also was a human being. And while some people say he's very difficult to get to know, I do not feel that way whatsoever. I think that his autobiography is not on paper. His autobiography is in this place. I think this is one of the most important, interesting sites, not just in America, but in the world. And the more we come to this place, the more we look at this place, the more we read into this place, the imprint of his outlook on life and his concern for how things appear, the more we begin to understand why he was the way he was. And of course, equally important to appearances and to how you present yourself as a leader was how you use the language. Now, Washington read much more than people seem to understand. And so, in many respects, it's very helpful and revealing to go and look at what he read and what influenced him. One was the great poem by Alexander Pope, Pope's Essay on Man. He read it through and through. So did virtually all of his generation. But he hadn't gone to Harvard. He hadn't gone to William and Mary. He had learned on his own. And in that magnificent work, there are 2 lines, which they all knew. And we would do well to remember them today. Act well your part. There all the honor lies. Not power, not glory, not fame, not wealth, honor. A word not too many people use anymore, or more discouragingly, don't understand. Our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor, honorable conduct, honorable behavior, off stage and on. He set an example of patriotism, and he said it again and again by understanding what really motivates people. He loved the theater. Act well your part. Fate, history, call it what you will, has cast you in a very lead role. And you have to imagine a historic proscenium around you. And you go on that stage and you play your part as you best possibly can. They all knew this line. It's one of the reasons they tried as best they could to act well their part. And with the attitude that what a chance to be a lead performer in this all-important turning point for the world. It was the idea, the goal, the sense of purpose and achievement that really drove those magnificent people of that day. This tiny little country on the edge of giant wilderness, population of 2,500,000 people, 500,000 of whom were in bondage, slavery. 2 million people would produce that kind of a generation, a miracle. Washington's favorite play by far was Cato, about the Roman statesman by Joseph Addison, another English writer, poet. And in that magnificent play, there is a line that I first saw in something that John Adams wrote to his wife. Now, keep in mind, in those days, they did not use quotation marks. And the line is, "'Tis not in mortals to command success, but we'll do more. We'll deserve it." And when I read that line, I thought, good God, how different is that attitude from what we have seen in our time by so many in positions of responsibility. And then I was reading something that Washington wrote, and there it was again. And I thought, wait a minute, how can this be? Neither line was quoted. So I started through Bartlett's familiar quotations from the 18th century, and bingo, there it was in the play Cato. But there's more to it than that. And one of the points I want to make, if at all possible, in tribute to George Washington today, is that yes, he was a man of action, if ever there was. And yes, actions speak louder than words, but not always, not always. Words can change history. Words can change the outlook of a generation. It's happened again and again. And words can be what motivate the action. One of the most dramatic and telling and crucial scenes in our history, because it took place in the Revolutionary War, during the Revolutionary War, on December 31st, 1776, the day that all the recruitment of the Continental Army, all they'd signed up for, expired. Every single one of Washington's troops, as of the next day, January 1st, 1877, was free to go home. And Washington called them out in formation at Trenton on December 31st, and he told them the following. He offered a bounty of $10 for all who would stay another 6 months after their enlistments expired. A considerable sum, by the way, at that time. And he had done it without any authorization from Congress. And as he wrote in a letter afterward to the Congress, I thought it no time to stand on trifles. The soldiers were all lined up, and he approached them on his magnificent horse. A commander rides a magnificent horse. And he addressed them, and he said, in the most affectionate manner, that they would get $10. And those willing to stay were told to step forward. The drums rolled. Imagine this scene. The drums rolled. Minutes passed, and not one man stepped forward. Not one. Now, Washington's just faced defeat. He's made his appeal. They turned him down. What does he do? He turns on the horse, rides off a little bit, collects himself, turns the horse about, and approaches them again. If that didn't work, I'll try something else. He said the following, "My brave fellows, you have done all I asked you to do and more than could be reasonably expected. But your country is at stake, your wives, your houses, and all that you hold dear. You have worn yourselves out with fatigues and hardships, but we know not how to spare you. If you will consent to stay 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you can probably never do under any other circumstance." Again, the drums sounded. The men began stepping forward. As Nathaniel Greene wrote, God Almighty inclined their hearts to listen to the proposal, and they engaged anew. Great moment. Breathtaking moment. Really happened. It's not some playwright's concoction. However, there was a playwright in the background, William Shakespeare, whom Washington also read. You'll remember Henry V. This story shall the good man teach his son. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, England, gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here. You are lucky to be here. You are lucky to be able to help your country. And he says, you will render a service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you can probably never do under any other circumstance. Same idea. Now, I can't prove, no one can prove that he drew it from that, but surely that's what it is. I feel that we need to know more, much more, about the individuals who have shaped our nation. And I don't mean just the politicians or the military people, the heroes of our wars and struggles. I mean all the extraordinary people who have shaped our culture, who've created what we believe in, what we're willing to work hard for, and what we still aspire to achieve in improvement. In the second line of God Bless America, which we didn't sing today or hear today, says, America, America, God shed his grace on thee. And God mend thine every flaw. God mend thine every flaw. Confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Washington was a man of immense self-control, who believed in liberty in law, who believed in education. And I can't imagine what the effect could have been, could be on him today, knowing this had been created. It's long past, but from now on, let there be no doubt that this was a human being deserving infinite study, because we need to know more about all of those eminent deceased from whom we've learned and been given so much. And we can never, ever know enough about George Washington. I want to close with a line from Swift. He loved Jonathan Swift. May we live all the days of our life.